Welcome to a special series called The Global Crisis Monitor, featured on the Treasury Update podcast. Thank you for joining. Series host Alexa Cook catches up with Craig Jeffery of Strategic Treasurer on the 8-week results from the COVID-19 Impact and Response Survey. This new iteration of the micro-survey reflects how respondents feel about their organization's outlook on liquidity positions, on payment security and fraud attempts, and even on some of the top concerns on organizations' outlooks on liquidity positions. Listen into this brief discussion to find out how Treasury and finance organizations are being impacted during these unprecedented times. Welcome back, everyone. We're at the Global Crisis Monitor series brought to you by the Treasury Update podcast. This is Alexa, your special series host, and I'm joined today with Craig Jeffery of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Craig.
Hey, Alexa.
Thanks for joining me today. So now that we're 8 weeks into the weekly Global Crisis Monitor, let's start off with some of the top headlines.
Yeah, I think the top headline is that it really looks like we're transitioning out of crisis. Not that it's super good or it's everything's good, but we're moving out of the worst part of the crisis. One of the things that we saw significant improvement is 4 weeks in a row now, the view on organizations have improved and the organization's response. So that's everyone responding for their company, and organizational liquidity has also improved. This is 4 weeks where that's improved. And that's a 2x improvement. So 35.2% saw their liquidity outlook improve over the prior week, which was 17% negative. 17% of organizations were negative from the prior week and 35% were positive. So we've had 4 weeks of net positive, and that's pretty significant net over net positive in this category. And then the 4 sentiments that we look at, across the board, for those that read the report, those all improved this week, and they're all higher than the prior week. So that's just positive on top of positive. On the economic side, it was more neutral with last week. When we look at the economic outlook over 3 months versus the 12-month outlook, what we saw is the shorter term time domain, the 3-month, has always been super negative, and it's been inching up, and it's moving towards equilibrium, which is a 5. It's been moving up there, improved again this past week over the prior week to the highest level. The 12-month outlook dipped a little bit, still in positive territory, but back to where it was a couple weeks ago. Overall, when we extrapolate things, it still shows, from that measure, about an 8-month period for economic recovery or equilibrium, which still puts us into early January of 2021.
Great. Those are some good positive headlines. And then I know this past week we've added in a few new survey questions specifically around fraud and staffing. Can you maybe walk us through some of the week's findings?
Yeah, I'll start with fraud. 36% saw an increase with additional attempts of fraud or cyber fraud. So 36% said yes. No one, 0%, saw any kind of decline, and the rest was static. So that's certainly showing our worst fears have been realized, where people are trying to take advantage of work from home, cyber fraud, potential changes there. Yeah, so on to staffing. We looked at prior 4 weeks, next 4 weeks, and then looking forward in time to 3 months. So the past 4 weeks, it was about 7 and 10 were maintaining staff levels. Of the remaining portion, it was 9 to 2 in terms of those organizations doing layoffs versus those that are hiring, so 9 to 2 negative. Looking forward 4 weeks, those organizations remaining a static staff level was almost exactly 70%, very, very similar to the prior 4 weeks period. But it was 3 to 1 for hiring, so still quite negative there. When we look forward the 3 months, it was just under half were planning on maintaining staff levels. But this is where positivity comes in. It was positive by a 3 to 1 margin. So that's pretty significant in our mind that in such a short time from now, it's a 3 to 2 margin of organizations looking to add to staff versus decrease staff at that time frame.
Nice. So let's take a look at some of those new statistics. What's been happening with finance projects?
Yeah, this one is the second week we've been running that through the monitor. We asked if the COVID crisis helped them reconsider any type of project or activity that wasn't previously prioritized. Liquidity plan and forecasting remained in the number 1 slot in the second week. But moving up from number 4 to number 2 was payment security and payment security training. That moved up, which we thought was interesting. And then we had counterparty risk.
Nice. So then if we take a look at the numbers from this week's monitor, how are people feeling about their organization's outlook on liquidity positions? And I did see that we're in the 4th week of improvement here, giving us additional optimism that things could be changing. And I know that we've been saying, in 2 or 3 more weeks, or now in 1 or 2 more weeks, we might change our pessimistic outlook. But do you have any more feedback on that, Craig?
Yeah. So, the top concerns were direct financial impact of the business and access to adequate liquidity. Those have, after we got past the first couple of weeks, those bubbled up to the top and have stayed there. Recessions in the economy we operate was the third, and then this newly elevated concern, this country preparedness, which has, not been in the top 4, has moved up there. And so we find that interesting just to see as more states, more countries, more regions are opening up, trying to do that methodically. The concerns about are their countries, headquarter countries, prepared to be able to respond to that. So we'll want to keep watching that. So let me ask you a couple of questions, because you've been monitoring some of the 3 key areas we look at every week in the monitor. What's going on with the time estimates for the 2 health criteria and financial normalcy? How's that looking?
Yeah, so on the health outlook, we are still seeing the extension of time until COVID-19 becomes a minor health issue. That jumped back up to about 10.5 month range from 8.5 months that we saw last week. So a bit of an increase there. And then the inflection point has increased this week and is sitting at just over a month. So I think the past 2 weeks we've been right around, if not a little bit below a month. So that one also saw a spike. And then for the financial normalcy in businesses, that came in at just about 8.5 months, which is the same as it was last week. So not a terrible amount of movement there, but just a little bit.
And that aligns pretty closely to our 3-month and 12-month economic outlook. So it's kind of interesting that those are getting even closer.
Yeah. So then each week we ask about AR and AP. Are there any changes on the negative outlooks here?
Just 2 things on this, and I'll be quick. Every week I talk about how negative AR is, and it is still negative, but it's never been less than 5x negative. So 5 times more companies saw their position on AR get more negative. It's still negative, but it's about 3.5x negative, and that is the best since the survey started. It's not cause for rejoicing, but less discouragement there. So it has moved off of the really, really bottom. So hopefully that'll move less negative and eventually positive at some point. Fiscal policy moved from barely negative to 2 times negative in week-over-week activity. So that had started off negative, moved almost to neutrality, and then this is the how central banks are providing liquidity in the market. So that moved negative this past week.
Okay. Another question we asked this week was a free-form question on concerns. Has anything bubbled up since this is now the 2nd week we've had that?
I think we've had this one almost every week. And this is the freeform one where people type in everything. And so it's like those word search charts. So liquidity, recession, waiting too long to lift restrictions, and concerns about a possible shutdown if it's not done well. Those were a number of the items there. So it's a multiple elements this week. It seemed like we had a nice story the first couple of weeks, but now we have multiple concerns, bubbled up that people are highlighting different things as their top concern when we don't have a forced rank list.
Gotcha. And then before we break for next week, is there anything else that we should be thinking about for the next weeks ahead?
So two things related to employment. So, we would keep looking at the overall market about actual job loss, unemployment numbers, what's going on with spikes, with more people out there. But we're also adding some questions about plans for staffing and, what they're doing with their staffing levels in the future. So we're trying to not just look at the reactive numbers that are after the fact, but if we can get a little bit ahead of the curve with there. So we'll look at that. The other element that I want to make sure we know is we've been referring to this as a global crisis monitor. It's part of the Treasury Coalition. The monitor has mostly focused on the crisis aspect of things. Some things extremely negative, moving less negative, and to some into an improving position. And so that this is our last week of calling it the Global Crisis Monitor. We're going to start calling it the Global Recovery Monitor. It's still the monitor, still the same event, but we're moving through the cycle. We've seen a lot more recurring positive trends, which is allowing us to focus and start to look to see what are some of the actions that are making the improvements and how are those coming along.
That's great. Well, thank you for joining me today, Craig. And like Craig said, join us next week when we shift over to the Global Recovery Monitor. Thanks, everyone.
We wanted to encourage you to take the Global Crisis Monitor survey repeatedly while it's live. It runs from Wednesday to Tuesday every week. You can go to treasurycoalition.com and follow the links. Add your voice and insight so that as a profession, we can take positive and knowledgeable steps to move our organizations and nations forward. Invest 5 minutes each week at treasurycoalition.com and get great information and insights while helping our profession and organizations.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.